Welcome to your Friday edition of Pensari Basketball. My name is Robert. Hit subscribe if you are a Raptor fan or if you're generally optimistic about the Raptors. I think this video is going to be for you, in which we are going to look at the young core, the Raptors players under 26. And look, there's a lot there's a lot of talent across the league right now. It's league scoring efficiency is going up every single year like clockwork. There are a lot of young, talented players. And for the Raptors' sake, I hope that they have a few of them at the very least. We're going to break down every single player under the age of 26, 26 and under on this team, place them into tiers, let you know what I like about them, what I don't like about them, what their eventual upside will be. So I'll be back with you in 90 seconds while the chat populates. Let's hit that intro.
I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Head out of the game, I don't play that fact. Once you let me go, no, you never come back. I'ma be the best that you never had. I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Head out of the game, I don't play that fact. Once you let me go, no, you never come back. I'ma be the best that you never had. I'ma kick, 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 I'ma be the best that you never had. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, no you want it. I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, I'm like a rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, see I got it. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex, I'm success. I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, see I. I'ma kick, 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 I'ma be the best that you never had. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, no you want it. I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, I'm like a rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, no you want it. I don't flex, I'm success. Effortless, I'm like a rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, see I got it. Rumba pa pa, rumba pa pa, no you want it.
All right, new intro. We got the entire hard drive loaded up. I spent the last, I want to say, week organizing my life, organizing the hard drive, organizing everything, and just making some graphics. And yo, man, I mean this graphic right here, this is the young core that we're talking about here. And this graphic, honestly, with the way I was organized a couple of months ago, this would have taken me like an hour. It took me 5 minutes. That's awesome. All right. So let's talk about this young core. Look, there are a lot of young teams in the NBA. There are a lot of really talented teams in the NBA. Some that come to mind off the top of my head, obviously, the OKC Thunder, like super talented for days, right? I'm pretty sure that the litmus test here, every fan base is very excited about their young player. They're excited about that second round pick. They're excited about City Sissoko. They're excited about, that late first round gem who's going to become the next Desmond Bain. But how do you separate conjecture from reality? How do you separate, wishful thinking to realistic projections? And that's hopefully what we're going to do here today. Bias aside, I am a Raptor fan, of course, but I'm going to try to be as realistic as possible with these players. And I'm going to give you my sort of 2K rating on all these players. First of all, I'm going to give you the whole roster. And then we're going to break down all the young players into tiers, starting at tier 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we're going to talk about what I think the upside of those players is. Now, I did an Instagram poll, and I asked our Instagram followers, how good is this young core? How good is a core of OG, Scottie, Grady, Precious, Koloko? Like, what is this core relative to the league? And very few people seem to think it's a top 3 core in the NBA. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair. There are a lot of teams that have been accumulating, high lottery talent for what feels like half a decade right now. And you look at teams like even the Detroit Pistons. If you ask an average Pistons fan, would you trade Jaden Ivey, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman? Would you trade all of this potential for Scottie, OG, Grady, and change? And I think a lot of NBA fans would probably be, inclined to say, yeah, we really don't know what we have in Cade yet. And if you ask an average Orlando fan, would you trade Franz and Paolo and Jalen Suggs and all that they have? Would you trade that for the Raptors' young core? And I'm inclined to say that they would probably reject that as well. So it seems that there's a pretty big consensus across the league right now, at least among analysts that I have heard and listened to on podcasts this summer, that the Raptors' young core is kind of mid. And by mid, I mean, fringy top 10, top 10, top 12, top 13 young cores in the NBA. Cores that come above it. OKC, of course, Orlando, of course. Um, some would say just because of the upside of Tyrese Halliburton, the Indiana Pacers, Jarris Walker, Tyrese Halliburton. Some would probably say the Portland Trailblazers, Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, obviously Scoot Henderson. Some, and I think most NBA analysts would probably say the San Antonio Spurs, Jeremy Sohan, Victor Wembanyama, right? Devin Vassell. There's a lot of young talent there. Some may also say some other teams that you wouldn't be expecting. Teams like the Atlanta Hawks, who still have Trae Young, who's very young and would be considered a very young player by any metric. Onyeka Okongwu, right? Shoot, are we forgetting about the Minnesota Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels? Not Jalen McDaniels, Jaden McDaniels. So needless to say, there's a lot of young talent across the league. And of course, then there are young players who just sort of underperformed. And, there are some players that are very young that you wouldn't think are very young. Look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. Would an average NBA fan trade you every young player the Raptors have for Darius Garland and Evan Mobley? Probably not, right? Probably not. Probably those two are seen as having the massive upside. We haven't even talked about the New Orleans Pelicans, Zion Williamson, with all of his off-court drama and everything that's been going on. He's still 22, 23 years old, right? I mean, he has still got quite a ways to go to hit his maximum upside. And let's not even talk about Brandon Ingram, the fact that he is under 26. Those two guys alone, I mean, that is a massive core, right? So everyone thinks about OKC, but people don't think about all the other teams. Let me know in the comments if there's a team that maybe you're thinking about that I haven't thought about, because I'm sure there are a lot, right? So where does this Raptors core of young players, Grady Dick, Scottie Barnes, Christian Koloko, Precious Achiuwa, OG Anunoby, where do they rank, right? What is the supporting cast supposed to be on this team? Because look, man, the Raptors have put a lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of time into development this offseason, right? The entire premise of the shifts that have happened. Did I say the Kings? I did not say the Kings, and I should have said the Kings. Domantas Sabonis is 26, I believe. De'Aaron Fox, obviously very young. Keegan Murray, very young. Kevin Huerter, still quite a ways away from his prime. So yes, that is another team that deserves mentioning. So there are a lot of young teams, and I'm positive there's one that we haven't talked about: the Charlotte Hornets, right? Brandon Miller, LaMelo Ball, right? So needless to say, there are a lot of teams out there and a lot of fan bases who are very excited about their young team. And of course, if you're an Orlando fan, you think that your core has greater upside, right? Greater upside than the OKC core. And if you're the OKC Thunder, you think you're going to win championships in the next decade. But of course, with the new CBA, this is not really how this works out. And the truth is that the value of having one guy who pops, like one guy who's like that MVP type candidate. Oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about the Boston Celtics. Rob Williams is still pretty young. Jason Tatum is still under 25. Luka Doncic. Look at the Dallas Mavericks young core of everything they've assembled around Luka Doncic this offseason, right? They have a lottery pick around him who I have a lot of faith in. So, I mean, geez, the value of one Luka. How much is one Luka relative to how many Chets would you take for one Luka, right? How many Jalen Williams? How many Josh Giddeys, how many Franz Wagners, how many Scott, I was going to say how many Scottie Barnes, but how many OG Anunobies would you take for one Luka Doncic or one Jason Tatum or one Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? The value of having that one guy, it elevates everything. Did we talk about Memphis? Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Oh boy. Is it possible that the Raptors don't have a top 13 young core? Look, man, the premise of this video is not really to stack the young core against every young core in the NBA. That's just the intro. The premise of this video is to just look at specifically who are these players, who are these young players on this team. You know, I'm guilty of it too. I'm getting very excited about, a 19 or 20-year-old who comes onto your team and, like Joey Grahams and the Charlie Villanuevas of the world. The truth is, a lot of players that you think about and you think are going to be really good at the draft. Oh my God, we not talk about the Denver Nuggets. Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray. Wow. It just keeps going. It just keeps going and going. And I know everyone that I have talked about, every team that I've talked about, there's still one that I'm leaving off, and I'm not sure who it is, but I'm sure that fan base is going to be angry about it. So look, the Raptors have clearly lost a lot of assets for nothing. And you got to look at, the ones that have gone out the door and ask yourself, how many of those players, if they had been flipped at some point, be it a Kyle Lowry, a Fred VanVleet, a Kawhi Leonard, a Serge Ibaka, a Marc Gasol, you have lost serviceable starters. Danny Green, you've lost all those players. They've gone out the door. You've gotten very little, if anything, back for any of them of substance, of value, right? To make matters worse, you've doubled down on the core. You've doubled down on a team that didn't really have much of an upside or much of a shot at a championship, and you've given up first-round picks. So sitting pretty now with a very mid, let's consider it a mid young core, you also don't have your draft pick of 2024 unless you bottom out. And the draft is weak. So what is the avenue to actually get better? What's the avenue to actually improve on this young core? Internal development, offseason development. That is really where the Raptors are going. But how much can you develop what you don't have, right? What if the players that you have just aren't the types of players that are supposed to blossom into a Desmond Bane, a Mikal Bridges, a Cam Johnson? What if that is not the upside of these players? What if you don't have enough blue chip prospects like a Dyson Daniels or a Trey Murphy? What if you don't have the talent? Well, I'm going to argue that the Raptors do have talent. I'm going to argue that the Raptors have a little bit more talent than people think. And while it may still, at the end of this, you may still conclude that the Raptors don't have a top 10 young core, I do think that we'll get a little bit more clarification in terms of what these players can be. All right. So let's start with tier 4. All right. Y'all appreciate the graphics got a little bit better on this channel. All right. So tier 4. And we're starting with Marquise Noel, right? Draft pick Marquise Noel, undrafted Marquise Noel, undrafted Ron Harper Jr., undrafted Javon Freeman Liberty, and the 28th pick or the 29th pick from the 2020 draft, Malachi Flynn. Now, Malachi Flynn, for all intents and purposes, has not worked out for the Raptors. However, he's looking swole as hell this offseason, and I still think that there is a chance that he can jump up into tier 3. But what is tier 4? Tier 4 is NBA players. Like, these guys have a shot. And believe me, these tiers are separated in upside, not in terms of what I think the players are going to do next season, but specifically what type of prospect I think they are. And so in tier 4, we have players that I think could eventually end up being NBA players. What does that mean? It means they're just guys. They're guys who fill out a rotation. They're your 7th, your 14th guy, your 13th guy, whatever. I think every one of these players has a shot, upside, maximum, to be at the very least that much, right? If I had to pick one player on this list that I think could jump up a tier, it's probably Javon Freeman Liberty. Now, why do I feel this way? He's shifty. He's weird. His game is weird. And there's a herky-jerkiness to his game, which is very interesting. So if there is one player in this tier 4 that I think could jump up to the next tier, it's him. In terms of Malachi Flynn, look, opportunity be damned. He was a hell of a college player, and he has not worked out for the Raptors. Now, is this a change of scenery situation? Does he have a realistic pathway to actually get minutes with Scottie, potentially Pascal, definitely Dennis Schroeder, all playing point ahead of him. Is this the opportunity that he needs? Well, I would argue that he has not really shown to date enough to warrant backup minutes on a team that is serious about doing anything in the NBA, right? And point guard is a really loaded draft position. Like, every single year, there's these big guards coming into the league. And if I'm a team on the fringes that's thinking, like, hey, like, do I want to give this guy some development run? Do I want to give him some time? Um, I'm not sure that he was already an older rookie coming out, right? So it wasn't like he was a freshman where it's like, now he's 3 years in, that he was like 20 or 19 when he came in. Like, he'd already put in some time there. So he's kind of close to hitting his, what I would consider, peak right now. And that's a pretty sad proposition, to think that, there were some really good players available at his draft position, and you burn one on him. Now, will this just go down as, this is one that Masai Ujiri just sort of has to live with, and, it's just not everyone's going to work out? I think there's a chance, there's a chance that he could, if he could settle into like that sort of spark plug, shoot every time you have the ball, penetrate, get into the paint. His handle is sick. He's a reasonable passer. He's a pesky defender. I think with a new coach, we could see something from Malachi. Marquise Noah, I think you'll see in my ratings at the end, he's just one player that I don't have the highest opinion of or belief in, just because of his height, because of defense, because of where the league is going. So I think this will be a fun player to watch in the 905. But, generally speaking, like, I think his skill level is very high for a rookie, but he's a 23-year-old rookie. He's 5'7", 5'6.5", actually. And I think that just, generally speaking, it's going to be a very hard road for him to become an NBA player. But I think all of these guys do have a chance. Ron Harper Jr. could be a very interesting development story. I really like his physique, his overall defensive acumen. His shot is still way too low. I'm not really sure how I feel about Ron Harper Jr. as a long-term prospect. I definitely don't feel like I'm as high on him as I was on Delano Banton, or especially Justin Champagnie, who is, by the way, a free agent. So I think the Raptors should probably try to look to bring him back. I know he wasn't happy with his role here, but Nick Nurse is gone, so maybe he would have an opportunity now. And if the Raptors still believe in him, after his cup of tea in Boston, I think, Justin Champagnie probably has about as good a shot as any one of these guys, if not a better shot, to become an NBA player. But yeah, like, again, of this group, I think Javon Freeman Liberty is the one that I sort of like the most. His 3-point shooting, general like scoring acumen, just, he has a chance. He has a chance to just pop and become something more than just, the 15th guy on your roster. But yeah, overall, this is not the part of the roster that's giving me hope. All right, let's move up to tier 3. And now, we got two guys, one of whom may not even be on the team next year. So what the hell do I know, right? But he is the oldest player that we're going to be talking about, and that is Jeff Doughton Jr. And of course, we have Jalen McDaniels. So what do I like about Jalen McDaniels that puts him above the other four players? Because he's right on the cusp, right? I think his 3-point shooting, his size, his overall IQ for the game, role player potential, I think he just has something. And tier 3 guys are guys that I think could be rotation players. Things like what I think could be an upside is as a rotation piece on a half decent team. What does that mean? It means the 9th guy, 8th guy. I think these two players have that sort of upside where they could be, 15 minutes eventually on a really half decent team, and they won't cost you wins, right? Jeff Doughton, of course, I love the point of attack defense. I love the selflessness. I love, just his overall composure for the game, how he organizes the offense. I've spent a lot of time watching Jeff Doughton film, and I've become a very big fan of his game overall. I think he's a better shooter than people give him credit for. With Jalen McDaniel, it's really, it's just he has a buy-in. Like, he has a sort of a way of playing which makes you think that he really understands his role, and he doesn't try to overcomplicate himself or go outside his role too much. And I think that would be a welcome addition for a team that often had players on the fringes who tried to do too much at times and really hurt the team last year. Let's talk about tier two. Now, this is going to surprise some people and probably going to get pretty controversial really quickly. But my tier two is Precious Achua and Gary Trent Jr. And this is where I think I'm going to get a little bit controversial because I think that I walked into last season really high on Precious and really low on Gary. And now I'm a little bit lower on Precious than I was going into last season. I'm a little bit higher on Gary Trent Jr. than I was going into last season. But in the end, I have ended up at tier two for both of them. And I think that this is going to be the first place where I substantially devote some time to talk about these players. So I think that while these players are both part of the young core that should have the Raptors really excited, I think that there is a sort of feel element that is sometimes missing from both players. That being said, they certainly have tier one upside in the right situation. And I think that these are the types of players specifically that can most benefit from the development and everything that the Raptors are doing, because something that Darko talked about a lot actually in the last month is teaching the game. Something that coaches need to do is teach players the game, teach players how to read and react and stop practices midway and just sort of show them, ask them questions, all in the basis of trying to teach them to be better, smarter basketball players. And I think both of these players could really benefit from that. Obviously, they're both hard workers. So hard work is not going to be stopping any player from tier two, tier one to tier zero, right? I just think that there's a feel element that is missing from both of their games. And they are both kind of on the cusp of 24, 25. With Gary, I think he's 24. And with Precious, I think he's 23, turning 24 really soon. So it's not like, these are 19, 20-year-old kids. Like, they played basketball for a really long time. There is, however, there's some upside with both of these guys. With Gary, obviously spent a lot of time this offseason just looking over his film and just seeing like how much he got better in the paint this past season, how well he does out of the isolation, how well he works off of Scottie and the DHOs. And, his role will really expand this year. I mean, people talk about Scottie having more of a role without Fred, but I mean, as the best shooter, arguably the best shooter, at least the most capable and willing shooter in the starting lineup, if he's starting, I think Gary Trent Jr. is going to be hoisting up a lot of shots this year. And, with Fred not really there, and Scottie and Pascal and Jakob, all very selfless players who are willing to pass the ball, and OG quite selfless as well. I think there is a very outside shot that Gary Trent Jr. could average 23, 24 points per game this year. And I think that would firmly change the conversation around him, especially if he's able to do it efficiently. And I think from everything I've heard about all the work that he's putting in, I mean, there's something there. The question is, what else do you do for me? Right. And in the case of Gary Trent Jr., not much. Right. Defensively, he will be the weakest defender in the starting lineup. Regardless of who starts, he will be the weakest defender in the starting lineup. And that's not about to change. There was a defensive fall off last year after a year that I thought was highly overrated. I think last year was probably fairly rated, but I think weirdly enough, people saying his defense fell off aren't really understanding that his defense wasn't that great to begin with. I really believe that. Like, I think I don't really understand where this stuff came from. Just you racked up a whole bunch of steals in a situation where, the Raptors were frankly just leading. I think the Raptors' possession margin last year was the highest of any team in the last 50 years. Like, that's how much they spammed the possession battle in terms of offensive rebounds, picking passing lanes, etc. And he's a cog. He's a cog in that. But that's not to say that he is by any means, if you could have let's say a good defender in his place, like, it would have been even better, like considerably better. He functionally, I think he struggles a bit in the post, struggles point of attack, struggles with screen navigation, struggles off the ball. Not a great defender, not a great passer, not a great defender, not a great rebounder. I mean, geez. So he is a bit of a specialist in that sense. But if he can become really efficient as a bit of a gunner, then I think that the role here as a tier 3 player or a tier 2 player is more or less like a solid starter. That's what I think a tier 2 player is. I think it's a solid starter, like a role player, solid starter. And for Precious Chua, this is where, some analysts are extremely high on him. And I understand why, because the flashes of him are brilliant, right? The twitchiness, the downhill stuff, the offensive rebounding, some of the full court, transition stuff, some shooting samples. Like he's shot the ball lights out for, solid periods of time. I was looking at a shooting chart from 2021, 2022 season, and it was insane how well this guy was shooting. But this year is like the past year, it was not so great. So just taking a look at Precious and just, sort of by the numbers, taking a look at him, the upside of him is, he's the first of several players that we're going to talk about who legitimately can guard 1 through 5, right? He wasn't asked to guard a lot of point guards, but he certainly could do it in a pinch, right? As a guard, defender, he's solid. As a wing defender, he's solid. As a center defender, which is where the majority of his matchups were, he's solid. I think he's less of a center and more of a power forward, small forward hybrid. I think he's a combo forward. Um, but I think his quickness is most exploited as a 5. So it's kind of strange, right? But then do you take away some of his advantages and push him towards his disadvantages if you take him out of the 5 spot, right? Because a lot of people are quick to say, well, he's not a 5. Yeah. But the fact that he can shoot and dribble and do all of these things is only above average as a 5. As a 4, or as a 3, he's definitely below average in a lot of these situations. And so then, you start going into, well, he's big for a wing. So, but would he be able to exploit that advantage? I don't think so. So I think his future is as a big, and honestly, he's one of the best rebounders in the NBA. And I think that is firm, like one of the best offensive rebounders. He gets to the line, he's just not very efficient, right? He's not very efficient. He's not overly creative. He doesn't see the game really well, but there's all sorts of upside and potential in terms of defense, right? Defense and transition play. And if he can just figure out how to be a role player, like an elite role player, I think he can give the Raptors something incredible off the bench long term. Would he be a replacement for Pascal Siakam? In the event that Siakam is traded, I think that they probably would have imagined that when they traded for him, but I don't see necessarily the feel to be anything more than, a 5th starter. So, I would pump the brakes a little bit on the all-star stuff. I don't really see an all-star here. I do, however, if he buys into the whole defensive role player, 5th starter, 4th starter, just be very limited on offense, transition, break, get offensive rebounds, clean up the glass, take open threes. Above the break, he was solid a couple of years ago. I think he was shooting only 44% from there for a bit. He had 39% from 3 for an entire 3-month stretch after the All-Star break 2 years ago. I mean, he's shown potential of solid shooting. I think sometimes it's just he gets in his own way. And I think with both Gary and Precious, there's some element of what can Darko and Jama do for these two guys? Because I think they can probably do a lot if there's trust and buy-in on both sides. I think these are the two players who will benefit like tremendously from the Raptors' recent shift to egalitarian, move the ball a little bit more type of offense. Let's go into tier 1. All right, this is where I lose half of you, right? So obviously, I am probably higher on Christian Coloco than probably anyone on earth, right? I think I might be his biggest fan. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And nothing that I saw last year deters me from how much I like him as a player. There's so much to like, first of all. He's humble as hell. Like as a person, he's just like ace, right? Like you really like someone who has that sort of awareness. And there's so many times last year where he did the right thing and Fred or Pascal or OG or even, Gary were doing the wrong thing on the court. And it's just so often how consistently I watched his tape and I just saw flashes of absolute brilliance. And then you look at his analytics defensively and they're off the charts and you're like, man, this totally tracks. As a defender, I think he could be a first team all defender type of player, right? Offensively, he struggled hard, right? His touch around the basket, his percentages were not great. That being said, the percentages may not have been great and he may not have been super efficient, but he did take the right shots. He took a lot of really good shots. He made quicker decisions than you would expect a rookie who'd been playing basketball as long as he has to make decisions. And look, I understand that. To me, honestly, Christian Koloko is what swings this young core into like really good territory. And that might be very strange for someone on the outside looking in, or maybe someone, even some of you Raptor fans who watched him last year and be like, look, I swear I saw this guy go 1 for 5 every other night. Like, what's the upside here? I remain very sold on his playmaking, which is seldom ever brought up or talked about, but his, passing out of the short roll is just awesome. I like him as an athlete a lot. I've seen him switch out on guards and hold his own. His length and just overall instincts, tracking the ball, hand-eye coordination is awesome. He has solid shooting touch, right? Will it ever come together into, a Miles Turner type of, taking 4 or 5 threes a game? I have no idea. But long-term, Christian Koloko should be the future at the center spot for the Raptors. Most importantly, perhaps, is his fit with Scottie is just tremendous. His fit with Scottie, Grady, OG, etc. This young core is awesome. He's selfless as hell. I think he has, really, he's just instinctually a really good basketball player. So I like him a lot. OG Anunoby, right? 25, just turned 26. Okay. It's complicated, right? I mean, 3-4 years ago, we were talking about him being the next Kawhi Leonard, and the numbers were really tracking out for about a couple of years, and then he's fallen off, right? There's been stagnation, tremendous stagnation. He has balance issues. He has durability issues. The shot is good, but it's not great. It comes and goes. Mikal Bridges seems to think that OG Anunoby is one player who has that sort of upside of star, that he's one player that Mikal looks at and says, this is a guy that reminds me of myself in Phoenix, where if he were given a bigger opportunity, he could really flourish. And who saw 25 points per game coming out of Mikal Bridges? So who's to say he's wrong? Look, I've seen flashes of OG Anunoby being really damn good, like all-star level good. And that's what tier 1 is, by the way. What I'm trying to say with tier 1 is I think every one of these guys eventually tops out if everything breaks right for them as an all-star. And that's not to say that they will become all-stars. That's not to say they'll be 10-time all-stars. I'm just saying they have all-star upside, which means that if you wake me up 5 years from now and say Christian Koloko is an all-star, I certainly wouldn't say get out of here. Like if you said that about Malachi Flynn, I would be absolutely like, how many people died for this to happen? But with Christian Koloko, I really do see that. And with OG, I do see that, now with OG, it'll just be about balance, opportunity, fit, but I think he plays really well off of Scottie. I think he'll get the ball a little bit more. Will that be enough? Will that plus two-way potential and everything that he already does on defense? He's already one of the top, in my opinion, 7 to 10 defenders in the NBA. I think some people who think he's the best defender in the NBA don't watch enough of the other teams play. But I think he's comfortably top 10. I think he has the hardest matchup on every single night. I think if you consider the toll that takes on him defensively, if you can lighten that even a little bit, would he not be by nature more efficient on offense? Of course he would. I think anyone would if they did not have to do what he has to do on defense. So I think part of that will just be Darko Rajakovic trusting him a little bit more with a few more initiation opportunities. And yes, I am aware of the numbers, and I'm aware that, he struggled in isolation scoring for 2 straight years. And I understand that, but there's also been good moments. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you look at the entire season and there was like 2 months where it worked. And you can say, well, small sample size, 2 months or the entire season. But sometimes 2 seasons or 3 seasons is also a small sample size in the grand scheme of things, right? So for instance, Scottie Barnes, right? I think with Scottie, we'll talk about Scottie after this, but with Scottie, I think like the first 3 months of his entire career, where he was presumably rawer than he is right now, he was like top 3 in mid-range shooting among all rookies, right? And that was pretty impressive. And people were like, oh my God, like this is great. He's had months where he's been a good 3-point shooter. And he's had months where he's been like the 3rd worst 3-point shooter in the NBA on over 3 volumes. So which one is it? I think it's neither. I think it's both, but I think when someone shows you for an entire 2 month or 3 month stretch that they can do something, then clearly, there's something there. Like it's not that small sample size. 3 months is not a small sample size to put something together. And I think I've seen 3 really good months of OG Anunoby. I've seen comfortable, isolation scoring and pull up dribble and, some decent post moves and stuff from him. It just hasn't completely come together. It doesn't seem to go his way. Sometimes he overthinks it. So I'm just hoping that more than anything else, he'll get out of his own way a little bit, that he'll have a more consistent role in offense. I think the ball needs to find him a little bit more. Honestly, there's so many times last year where there were players wide open as Pascal or Fred or Gary or somebody was just dribbling to three defenders. And very often the player that was open was OG Anunoby, clearly wide open. And look, man, like if you have a coach who's going to hold the players accountable for not making those passes, I think he can be one of the biggest beneficiaries, because on the other end, he's never one, well, almost never one, to be depriving people of those passes. So I think overall, he was a great teammate. I just don't think his teammates were as great as he was. Now, Grady Dick. Honestly, this is probably hot take territory. How can you possibly project all-star for a guy who has not played a single NBA game? Couldn't every other team that just drafted a player in the top 13 say the same thing? Yeah, they could. I mean, and as presumably almost every single player taken top 13 is assumed at the time of being taken top 13, especially in a stacked draft like this, to have all-star upside. With Grady, I think his tools are just incredible, right? Like I think he has such height as a shooter. I think he'll come in and day one in the NBA be a top 25 to top 30 shooter in the NBA. I think him getting minutes for this team really changes the shooting outlook for this team. And it's not, that the Raptors haven't had shooters. They've had, Joe Wieskamp on the roster. They've had, various guys who, in theory and on paper are good shooters. I think the difference here is Grady can get his shot off, like no problem. He can get a shot off in a variety of different ways. He can get it off the move, off the catch. Like he can, do things in transition. He's a really smart player. I think he's more than just a shooter. And I think that that's what makes his upside as a shooter so impressive, is because all those other things that he does are what presumably or hopefully or in theory will unlock the shooting. So, when I think about the Raptors losing Fred VanVleet and getting Grady Dick and Dennis Schroeder, I actually don't think that the fall off is as great as people are making it out to be, because I think that Grady Dick could easily shoot 37% from three as a rookie. Now, will he? I have no idea. He could shoot 30%. He could shoot 32%. He could shoot 42%. I have no idea. But if I was betting, I would say I would take the over on 36% for him as a shooter. And I think there's all this other stuff that he does that can make him a very valuable player. Yeah, I think he's going to get hunted on defense big time. He's very weak. I think he's going to struggle finishing in the paint, especially as a young player, as a rookie. But he's 19. He's 19, 20 years old. I think as he gets to about 22, 23, if the work ethic stays, and I mean, it's never guaranteed with young players that you draft professionals for the first time that the work ethic continues to be the work ethic. But if the Raptors have done their homework, and I suspect that they have, and, with the way this team is going to play, his skill set is so valuable, so important. He is going to get so many shots. Like there's so many good screeners on this team that he can run off of. Him popping for them this season could be the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs. I'm that serious that this guy could have that big of an impact for a team that is starved for shooting off the bench, that he could be a guy who takes 3-4 threes a game off the bench. Now, will that eventually turn him into an all-star? I don't know. I guess it depends on how big a role he's going to have. But I think he does all this other stuff. Like I think in his prime, like in his absolute prime, I could see him being a 26-3 guy, or a 26-4 guy, or even a 26-6 guy. I don't know how much his playmaking is going to progress, but I could realistically see him being, maybe a 20+ point per game scorer on the very high end, right? Yeah, I don't think he's ever going to be a great defender, but I think he can get there. Like I think he can get to a reasonable level as a defender because of his size. Tyler Hero is not a good defender, but Tyler Hero is a lot shorter than Grady Dick, right? So I think filling out, getting stronger is going to help him a lot, both offensively and defensively. I think he's just a really smart player. And I think that you'll notice that my tier one is pretty much just based on the mental side of the game, right? Like I need players who read the game really well. So yeah, Precious Achua is probably more physically gifted than Grady Dick and OG Anunoby and Christian Koloko, but I don't think he's mentally there. I don't think he processes the game the way these guys do. And I think that's a big differentiating factor. Um, Obviously, my tier zero is Scottie Barnes, and he's in a tier by himself. And tier zero is really first team All NBA, that level of upside. So I had a lot of conversations over the last couple of days with people who think that I'm very biased about Scottie. And I don't disagree. I certainly am probably higher on him than any person who talks about the NBA on the internet. And there's a lot of reasons for that, obviously. Chief among them, obviously, is I really value playmaking and unselfishness and all the intangible stuff. I really think that he's so far behind on skill, and yet he's somehow, despite his skill work being so far behind, he's managed to make himself a productive NBA player at the age of 20 and 21. I think his role was really hard offensively and defensively. I don't think people give it enough credit, the toll that he's taken. And I just genuinely think that like he's really hard to stop. When he gets going, there aren't a lot of things that defense can do. There's nothing that you can really take away from him. And I think that the eventual upside, right, for let's just say like a really talented scorer, it comes when, okay, you rattled off like 14, 13 points in a row. Now I'm going to try to take away your scoring by sending a double. Now what are you going to do with it? And I just think that with Scottie, the question of now what are you going to do with it, it just doesn't come up because he's always one step ahead of you, right? So when I talk about processing the game at a high level, when you talk about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Shea is a great example of a player who's not overly athletic. And I think when the Clippers traded him, for Paul George to the OKC Thunder, granted, whatever Sam Presti saw in him, be damned. I don't know if he saw this. I think it would be really hard to believe that the Clippers knew that they were trading away a guy who would eventually become a top 10 player in the NBA because his athletic profile and skills profile did not really project as a guy who had that kind of upside, who could one day put up 27, 28 points per game comfortably. So how is he doing it? Well, Shea processes the game like really well. He uses his angles really well. And there isn't a lot you can take away from him. He plays the game at his own pace. There's a lot of Shea in Scottie's game, actually. There's also a lot of Luka in Scottie's game. If you really pay attention to it, Luka's just a very, 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 very advanced skill version of all those things. So yeah, so that's pretty much how I feel about the young core. Obviously, like in his prime, I think Scottie could be like a 28, 12, and 8 guy. I think he could easily be a 20, 10, and 10 guy. Whatever he can be, I think it contributes to winning in a really major way. I think he's a really good player, and I think he's probably primed to make the biggest jump out of any player on this team. But a close runner-up to that could be OG, could be Gary. I think both those guys could take a huge step up this year as well. For Scottie, I think the assists are going to go up. Like this year, I think the assists are really going to go up. Last year, he managed to get 5. Pascal was like, I think 5 years into his career before he touched 5 assists per game. The playmaking is going to come fast. Like his passing skill is just so great. And then the minute he becomes like a real threat to score, like you can't stop him one-on-one and you have to send a double, that passing is just going to become even more dynamic. People talk about Nikola Jokic. There's so much Nikola Jokic can't do as a passer or Magic Johnson couldn't do as a passer because of, let's call it limited athleticism. Athleticism and scoring potential, all of these things just make your passing that much more dangerous. And I think Scottie's got, more athleticism than people give him credit for, perhaps less athleticism than some people think he has. But I think he's a really solid athlete who sees the game and processes the game in a really great way. And, again, if all of this clicks for him, I think, first team All NBA is very much within the ranks. Just as a fun exercise, I decided to rate out every single player like 2K pretty much. And I'm very interested to know your thoughts on this, or if anything is really sticking out, like this is crazy, or um, I don't know. Uh, Muvsy Hoops saying you back up your Scotty claims with facts. I don't think it's a bias. Uh, I mean, I still think it's a bias, but still, it's cool. Ned, give me Luca Garza over Coloco any day. Ned, you need help, man. Jeez. Okay, I'm just gonna read through some comments here, and I'm betting on Malachi Flynn this summer. Okay, cool. I wouldn't take that bet, to be honest. I wouldn't. I just hope for a bounce back from Malachi, but I don't think it's going to be out of the league soon. Um, Thank you so much for the super chat, Dylan. It really helps. Thanks for the live, Rob. What do you think OG's next contract average annual will be in these two scenarios? One, averages 20 points with some playmaking at 4 assists, same production as last season. Um, well, I think that his contract will be predicated on health, right? I mean, teams obviously like him primarily because he's a really portable, great defender. His versatility and portability basically swaps into 90% of rosters and makes them better immediately. You don't have to change anything for him. He spaces the floor. He's a smart player. So really the only question with OG is, can he stay healthy consistently to give you, 65 plus games of production every year? He did have a single year where I think he played like 43 or 44 games. So, as long as he's above 65 to 70, 65 games, I'd say would be the mark for durability. I think his next contract is going to be north of 30 million. I think that's guaranteed. He's way too valuable. He does way too much. And so, the question then becomes is like, do casual fans underrate OG Anunoby way more than front offices do? Yeah, they do. Thanks a lot for the super chat, man. Appreciate it. Lead is leadership. Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure that there's some controversial, ratings here. And look, I mean, I think Scotty can get a lot better than this. This is kind of where I see them as right now. Otto is obviously the third or fourth best player on this team. The only reason he's on the bench and the reason he has that rating is, in my opinion, the durability rating on him would probably be like, I don't know, 10. He just can't stay healthy. Grady, of course, like I think he has massive upside. And I think more or less I wanted to do this just to understand the shooting, right? I wanted to understand the shooting woes off the bench, right? So Otto and Grady unlock the shooting for me. If Precious can get back to, I don't want to talk too much in terms of 2K ratings, but like let's just say there was a stretch of Precious Achua's career where he was like a solid 80. And there's been a stretch of Precious Achua's career where he's been a solid 60, like 62. Like last year, his shooting chart was honestly abysmal. So when I look at someone like Precious Achua, there was Aaron Rose. He did one of those TikTok videos where he's talking about the average NBA team has like 8.4, 8.5 rotation players every single year. The Raptors had fewer last year. Some teams have a little bit more, but it averages out to about 8.4. So if you look at the Raptors roster, right, how many rotation players do you see here? right? Now, if Christian Koloko pops for you, right? If Jalen McDaniels is a player, if Precious, like, I mean, you're looking at like 11 guys who deserve minutes, right? And that's not even factoring in Thaddeus Young, Malachi Flynn. That's definitely not factoring in, by the way, a potential Pascal trade, which will result in a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 type of trade. And presumably, every player you're getting back is going to be better than Thaddeus Young or Malachi Flynn. So at some point, you start looking down this roster and you're like, shoot, like who's not playing here? You know, are you setting up a situation where a really good player is going to be outside the rotation? Is that a terrible thing, given the dearth of injuries that have been happening in the NBA every year? I think it's a good problem to have. It may not be the greatest problem to have if you have massive talent issues in your starting 6, 7 players, right? So if you're top, like, there's a lot of different theories about roster building, but I think one of the most consistently awful way to build a roster, in my opinion, is to have like 7 average players who are flanked by like 5 below average players, right? Because it just sort of melds into like, oh, we're a really deep team, which is great. It's great, right? But you don't want to build an entire team, with the 60th to 90th best players in the NBA. You know what I mean? Like that team is going to lose a lot because there's still one ball. There's not 5 balls. So presumably, unless Scottie Barnes or OG Anunoby take a massive step up, your only guy who's in that top 35, top 30 conversation is Pascal Siakam right now, right? OG can probably enter it in a myriad of ways just by becoming more efficient and a higher volume shooter. I think he could probably enter that conversation at the very least. So you could do it by committee, right? Because I don't think, for the top 5 players on this roster, specifically Gary, Jakob, Scottie, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility for any of these guys to touch top 50 players in the NBA, right? I mean, you can do the math real fast, right? Like there's 30 teams, there's 150 starters in the NBA. If you have 5 of the top 50 players in the NBA, you're sitting real pretty. But, for now, Scottie, Jakob, and Gary are outside that tier. Jakob, not by much. Scottie, not by much. Gary, by quite a bit, right? So you need those 3 guys to really take a step up this year for you to start doing something close to like the grit and grind Memphis Grizzlies. You know what I mean? Like that team was really successful. Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, etc. They had just enough to get by, but they had a lot of depth, right? They had a lot of depth. I think they had Shane Battier, Mike Miller. Like they had a lot of really good players that were not great. I think you could do it like that. Every team does not have to be the Miami Heat Big Three or, Shaq and Kobe. Like there's different ways to build a team. But I think that if you lose Pascal and like if the combination of 2 things happen, you lose Pascal and you trade him for like a depth move, right? Like let's just say you do trade him for Hunter and Okongwu or Hunter and I don't know if you're getting Okongwu. I've talked to a few people who think that, Okongwu is off the table in most trade talks for Atlanta Hawks. So let's just say you get Hunter and Bogdanovich and AJ Griffin and Kobe Buffkin. Like, let's just say you get 4 guys like that. Well, there's 4 guys who need to play, right? And you're presumably, taking out one guy who's going to be getting minutes in Pascal and probably a filler like Thad or Boucher potentially. So now you have a bit of a problem where you have like a ton of guys who are just guys. You know what I mean? Granted, depth is not a problem. The Raptors, had a massive, like, I think you look at a team like the Brooklyn Nets last year, you look at the the North Raptors. I think these are both teams where guys who were not seen as stars stepped into the role as star and did well, right? In the case of the Brooklyn Nets, it's guys like Nick Claxton, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. In the case of the the North Raptors, it was Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. Do the Raptors have that, right? Do they have that in Gary, OG, Scottie, Grady? Like, is there someone in that group that has that level of, I can take one step up if given an opportunity? Because it's talked about a lot on podcasts. And, if you talk to NBA players, they'll always tell you, like, man, there's like 4 or 5 guys on our team that could be 20-point per game scorers, but they're not very efficient. And so sometimes, in theory, if you gave a lot of volume attempts to someone like OG, would he really be less efficient than Fred? I don't think so. But he would have the reputation as like a 24-point per game scorer. And certainly his trade value or market value would be a lot higher and Fred's would be a lot lower. So I think that, you can take a look at that and just say, okay, well, how much worse do you think OG and Scottie would be than Fred and Pascal last year? Like, presumably, like, how much worse do you think it is? Like, the Raptors' entire, why were the Raptors bad last year? I mean, if you really talk about it, why were the Raptors bad? Well, they were supposedly bad because they didn't have a bench, at least one that they trusted. So the starters burned themselves out. Okay, fine. Let's assume that there's diminishing returns after 34 minutes played. Players are tired. This could explain a lot of the late game collapses. And it's not all just Fred and Pascal being mental midgets, who just couldn't get past the hurdle, right? It's not that. Okay, it's not that. It's more. It's they're tired. They're carrying too much. Okay, so there's a lack of depth. So let's just say you solve the lack of depth issue, and then certain guys have to move up in the pecking order. Well, does a player like Gary Trent Jr. really factor to you as being a less efficient isolation scorer than Pascal Siakam? Not really. Not really. To me, probably not. So again, there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm very excited. The Raptors are opening up training camp, I believe, in Vancouver in 2 months, 3 months. Man, it feels close. I'm excited. This is about as excited as I've been for a Raptor season in a very long time. I've gotten my hard drive organized. I hope y'all liked these graphics. It was cool. Give this video a like for the improved graphics and Pinsari basketball finally having an organized hard drive. The mess of hard drives behind me. Thanks a lot for tuning in. People have complained that these lives are sometimes really, really whatchamacallit. Sorry, who's nice. I'm trying to read these comments. They don't get these numbers. I got these numbers, and I just based it on feel, man. Like, this is kind of just where I see it, right? I think OG's an underrated leader, man. I really do. May not have always been the most vocal leader, but I think he does a lot of leadership stuff, like important stuff when it comes to leadership. So not only do both Pascal and OG have, that lead by example, do as I do, not as I say type of attitude, or, but I think OG keeps it light. I think he cares about his teammates. I think being a good teammate is a really big part of being a leader, in my opinion, right? Which means that when you get shafted on offense, it means that you don't go and take a dumb shot the next time you touch the ball. I think that's a part of being a leader. I think part of being a leader is communication, being a good communicator. Yeah. Here's a question. I was kind of just pondering this as I realized there's still a couple of free agents who are available, and the Raptors have apparently filled up their roster with Garrett Temple. Would you guys welcome Serge Ibaka back, kind of as a development big type of role? It's interesting, right? The Raptors have 17 players, 18 players fighting for 17 spots realistically. And still, there's a part of me that's just like, would I prefer Serge Ibaka on this team over Thaddeus Young? Probably. So I don't know. I would really welcome him back. I think that his just personality would be really great in this locker room. And I think it would be, I don't know, from a marketing perspective, at least from MLSE's perspective, I think it would be a really good thing to have him back. I'm not suggesting that it'll sell more tickets, but I think to the casual observer who tuned in and started watching Raptors basketball around 2019, I think that Serge Ibaka was like one of the favorite players from that championship run. So I would really welcome him back, just because I think that he could really help Christian Koloko, to be honest. But yeah. 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 I as I see it, I don't think this roster is set. So I think that there will be certain I love that. Yeah. I think there'll still be a couple of trades left. As it sits right now, Jeff Doughton is on the outside looking in, which I wonder if that's just motivation for him right now. Like, shoot, like we just pay Garrett Temple $3 million to motivate everyone on the roster to get a little bit. I don't know. But as you'll notice, no player had a higher leadership rating than Garrett Temple with his 91 leadership. I really believe in his leadership. From everything I've heard over the last week or so, yeah, I really think that he'll be a solid leader in the event that Thaddeus Young or Otto or someone is moved. But yeah, I think the Raptors need to consolidate, man. Like I think they have too many guys who need minutes, who could play minutes. And there are a lot of teams out there that are 7 deep and they could probably use kind of, like give me one guy for 3 guys type of trade. And it could really help. I think the Raptors could really benefit because if Dennis Schroeder is your 6th man, I don't really like your odds. But if Dennis Schroeder is your 8th man, I like your odds a lot better. So yeah, I think could you consolidate your 10th, 11th, and 12th guy for someone else's 6th guy? I don't know. But maybe if the 6th guy is on a really terrible contract, you could. Anyways, I will talk to y'all later. And yeah. All right. Make sure to hit subscribe on your way out and like this video. It'd be great. I'm going to be spending a lot of time this weekend and next week editing up my feature. I'm very excited. I'll definitely share a little bit of it and about it with you guys maybe next week. Anyways, have a great weekend, y'all. Take care. And this is a happy birthday to Barack Obama today, who turned 62. It is a happy birthday to my mom, who would have been 65 had she been alive. So, yeah. Anyways, have a good one, guys. Peace.